Good morning, everyone. We're just going to wait a minute or so just to let people roll in. But thank you very much for joining. Whilst we're waiting for people to join us, please put in the chat who you are, where you're from, and what the job you do is, and anything you're particularly interested in seeing today. It'd be good to see where people are from. And we'll just give it 1 or 2 minutes and then we'll get started. We've got well over 100 people signed up for this webinar today, so it's a really nice turnout. So yeah, for those of you who are just rolling in, drop in the chat, say who you are, where you're from, the job that you do. And we'll be making this hopefully a nice interactive session in the lovely Thursday day heat as well. Hi Holly, hi Claire, hi Helen, hi Lucy, hi Teresa and Lindalee. Good to see some familiar faces. Okay, we'll give it till 10:32 and then we'll make a start. So again, for anyone joining, drop your name, your role, where you're from in the chat. We're going to make today nice and interactive. All right. So good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. So today's session is all about getting new tenancies off to the best possible start. I think it is very fair to say that housing providers are operating in a very difficult environment. Housing teams are increasingly helping people navigate rising living costs, benefit changes, financial vulnerability, a growing demand for support, whilst all trying to balance regulatory expectations, stretch resources, and the need to deliver a great experience. And at the same time, the profile of new tenants is changing. More people are moving into a tenancy already under financial pressure. They might be worried about paying for their bills, furnishing a new home, or simply trying to make their income stretch far enough to cover everyday's essentials. So those first few conversations we have with tenants and new tenants matter more than ever, and they are really key opportunities to build trust and identify their support needs at the earliest opportunity. Getting it right means tenancies are far more likely to sustain. Get it wrong, when there's a small issue, it can quickly become a persistent one as well. So today is about how we create the conditions for successful, sustainable tenancies from day one. We've got about an hour with you. We'll use the first 50 minutes to look at some practical approaches to achieve exactly that. And we'll leave 10 minutes at the end for Q&A. But as I mentioned earlier, we want to make this as interactive as possible. So as we're going through the session, if anything resonates with you, share your experiences of those similar problems or solutions, or if you've got any questions, please drop them in the chat. One of my colleagues will be gathering up those questions and we can go back to them towards the end of the session. So hopefully today you'll leave with some ideas that you can take back to your own organization, whether that's strengthening your onboarding process or improving earlier intervention, or thinking differently about those first few weeks to shape the entire tenancy journey. So with that, let's get started. So just as a quick introduction, my name is Dave. I am Director of Partnerships at Lightning Reach. My job's to work with lots of the partners that we work with across housing, to councils, to charities, energy, and more. And the common thread throughout all of that is how we support those organisations to deliver better help to the clients that they serve. And I'm joined by Mark Walker. Mark, do you want to do a quick introduction to yourself?
Yeah, of course. Hi, everyone. My name is Mark Walker. I work for an organisation called Mobysoft. So although I work for a tech company, I've always worked in social housing. So for the last 25, 26 years, I've worked across various social housing providers. Probably in the last 10 years, it's predominantly been in income collection and financial inclusion. And I think my approach to income collection is that I think it's massively important for organisations to be super customer focused and nice to tenants, but it's also important to get the rent in as well. And I've always had a massive focus on making sure any organisation that I've kind of managed in the past have always got new tenants off to the best possible start. So I'm quite passionate about it. So thank you, Dave, for allowing me to talk today. In terms of my role at Mobysoft, I'm pretty much on site 4 days out of 5 at the moment. So Mobysoft provides free training and development sessions for its customers. I've delivered about 650 of those training sessions over the last 4 years. I've built a suite and a variety of different training subjects that our customers have got access to. And a lot of those sessions are focused on how to get it right for new customers, with particular focus on improving services to tenants. In terms of Mobysoft itself, we've got about 150 customers across the UK, and we process about 1.8 million social housing tenancies every single week. And we have about 4,000 daily users on the RentSense system. And we've been going for about 21 years. We're a data and analytics company, and we work across rent collection and now repairs as well. I think in terms of Mobysoft's approach to income collection and tenancy sustainment, it's about prevention rather than cure. We use smart tech and AI to create capacity for our customers. But the most important thing for me is trying to blend that perfect balance between good tech, but also the human touch as well. And a lot of what we'll go through today is around how to provide really, really strong levels of customer service, but blended with good use of technology too. As it says on the slide here, I'm very, very much all for rent collection with compassion, collecting with care. It's very, very difficult for lots of tenants at the moment. People are still going through those cost of living challenges. I said at the start, I'm super passionate about getting it right for new tenants. I'll come on to the reasons why a little bit later on. But over the course of today's session, we want to focus on new tenants that are signing up for a new property. And we've had some great validation actually in the last 6 months or so at Mobysoft. Housemark have independently validated that RentSense users have collectively outperformed on non-RentSense users quite considerably over the last 5 years. So to get that rubber stamp for a respected organisation like Housemark is a great rubber stamp for all the hard work that our customers are putting into their local neighbourhoods.
Cool. And then just to quickly touch on Lightning Reach for about a minute, if for those of you that don't know us, we're rebuilding how financial support is delivered. So we're the only platform that helps people to quickly access grants, support with bills, benefits for a simple platform. And really what we're trying to do is lay the foundations for people to have lasting financial stability. And our tech is the infrastructure that organizations rely on to deliver support faster, reduce admin, and increase impact at scale. We've helped more than 450,000 people. We've unlocked over £30 million worth of support, and we help around about 100,000 people a year. And the work we're doing with Mobysoft is really turning this early arrears risk into tenant support, where Mobysoft can identify tenants at risk, and then Lightning Reach can help those tenants access personalised financial support. So why is getting the first few weeks of a tenancy right more important than ever? I wanted to touch on some research that we did with TSB and Step Change, because I think before talking about solutions, it's worth taking a moment to understand the scale of the challenge. So with TSB and Step Change, we surveyed over 2,000 UK adults to understand how people are experiencing their finances today and where do they turn for support. And the headline finding is really stark. Almost 4 in 10 adults say they're financially worse off than they were this time last year. And we're not in this sort of cost of living story anymore. We've walked from one crisis to another. We're really seeing sustained financial pressure becoming embedded in people's day-to-day lives. And what struck us most simply wasn't the level of hardship being reported. It was how many people are struggling silently and how difficult it remains for people to access support when they need it. And when we dig deeper into the data, what became clear is that financial pressure is no longer affecting a small group of people. 2/3 of adults told us they're worried about their finances in the coming months. Almost a third have already cut back on essentials such as food, heating, or energy. A quarter are dipping into their savings simply to manage everyday costs. And 1 in 8 say that debt is becoming difficult to manage. Traditionally, organizations focus on identifying people when they're already in serious financial difficulty. And I think what this data suggests is that vulnerability starts way, way earlier. People are adapting, they're coping, they're making sacrifices long before they appear in debt or formally ask for help. So I think what that means from a housing provider point of view is we need to get better at spotting vulnerability upstream rather than waiting people to hit that crisis point. And that first few weeks in a tenancy can be a really great opportunity to do that. Stigma is still a major barrier, and it's something that really stood out in our findings as well. And we often might assume that people might talk to their friends and families about money worries, but many people actually don't. A third of people told us they're not comfortable with talking about money with their family or friends, and people interestingly reported a high level of confidence when speaking to charities, debt specialists, or banks. And I think that's a really important thing just to call out for those on the call, because on this webinar today, we have lots of people from councils, housing provider, other sort of advice services as well. And it shows that organizations like you have a really unique opportunity, because people might be willing to have difficult conversations with professionals such as yourselves rather than those closest to them. So that really places a responsibility on all of us to make those conversations easier, earlier, and more supportive. And what this research, I think, so some takeaways for housing providers to sort of take away from this research is really three priorities for new tenant onboarding. The first is about identifying financial pressure earlier. One of the clearest themes from the research that we did is that people are often experiencing financial pressure way before it will show up on a rent account. Two-thirds of people told us they're worried about their money, they're cutting back on essentials, and these people might not have actually fallen into arrears yet. They're people who are coping, they're making sacrifices, and they're doing everything to stay afloat. And I think for housing providers, that's a really important distinction. It's an indication that someone is struggling is a missed rent payment, but we've probably missed weeks, maybe months, where earlier conversations and earlier support might have made a difference. The new tenancy period is one of those few opportunities we have to build a genuine understanding of a tenant's circumstances. It's the point that we can ask the right questions, identify challenges, and offer support before financial pressures become as arrears. So, moving from reactive to a proactive model. The second implication is making support easier to access. Our research also showed that a third of people simply don't know where to turn when needing help. And almost 1 in 5 had actually abandoned an application for support altogether. And that is not because they don't want help. Often that's because they don't know where to go, it's fragmented, and they might need help with a few different bits, from benefits to grants to council support to debt advice. And for someone who's already under pressure, that complexity can be incredibly overwhelming. And sometimes support journeys aren't designed around how people actually live as well. Needing to phone up 9 to 5, but actually you're at work. So being able to complete forms after work or during a lunch break or once their children are asleep is really, really important. The third is better coordination, working together. And I think one of the strongest messages from the research as well is that financial hardship rarely exists in isolation. A tenant struggling to pay their rent might also be dealing with rising energy costs, caring responsibilities, health conditions, insecure employment or debt. But organizations often support people through that sort of individual services as well. And like housing providers cannot and should not solve all of these problems themselves, but you are one of the first organizations to spot when something isn't quite right. So it places housing teams in this unique position to not necessarily provide every form of support, but act as that gateway to connect tenants to the wider help that's already available. Ultimately, all of this is why sort of getting tenant onboarding matters so much. The last thing I'll say is that about 50% of our users on Lightning Reach are actually social housing tenants as well. And increasingly, they are arriving under financial pressure from day one. So the earlier we identify that pressure, the easier we make it to make support easier to access, the better we work together across organizations, the more we're likely to prevent arrears and sustain tenancies. So with that, I am going to hand over to Mark, who can bring this to life by looking at what effective new tenant onboarding looks like in practice.
Thanks, Dave. Just before we go into that, I just wanted to pull together some things that are coming down the tracks for the rest of this year and probably into 2027. I think everyone has probably seen pretty much everyone transition onto universal credit now. I'd be surprised if there's much more to go in terms of the UC migration. In terms of rent and welfare changes, there have been cuts to disability benefits. So anyone that claims the limited capability for work element of universal credit will see that payment be half of the amount than if they're an existing claimant. The 2-child benefit limit was scrapped at the start of April, so people get additional amounts for each child. So around about an extra £303 for each child born after the 6th of April. I just wondered actually if anyone is seeing any impact of that in terms of the benefit caps, because people are getting additional amounts in terms of those extra child payments, but actually are people then being hit by the benefit cap? And Dave, I know we spoke at the recent housing event around the new crisis and resilience fund, but in a lot of organisations that I go to at the moment, not many organisations have got the new crisis and resilience fund set up yet. What are you finding, Dave? I know you're helping one or two.
Yeah, we're supporting a few councils with that at the moment, and yeah, I think it's a bit of a mixed picture. Some have got that very much in place at the moment, and some are still in emotions of kind of working out their strategy on how to tackle that. And I think the key change with the crisis and resilience funding is that real focus on resilience. So, if someone is in crisis, how do we prevent them from coming back too? So, what is quite exciting about it is what councils are kind of focusing on to prevent people from coming back. So that might be relying on different type of income maximization services, debt advice providers, and others to really support that tenant situation.
Yeah, absolutely. And then in terms of benefit uprating, people's benefits increased by 3.8% at the start of April. I think what we're generally finding across the data set at Mobysoft is a massive swing in tenants that have never ever been in arrears before, but are moving into arrears for the first time ever. I think, Dave, you touched upon this just a second ago with those continued challenges for people. A lot of social housing tenants have always been in a cost of living crisis. A lot of this isn't new to them, but we're seeing a big swing in tenants that have never ever had to probably worry about their rent account before, but are suddenly starting to feel the pinch for the very first time ever.
And Mark, just before we move on, I see quite a lot of chat around the benefit cap not being fully understood by claimants. Have you got anything to sort of just add on that?
Yeah, yeah, it's a weird one that because in and around April and May time, I asked this question a lot, and people were like, "No, it's not. The benefit cap isn't really affecting us." But actually, in this webinar this morning, 3 or 4 people have said that they're starting to see the benefit cap hit tenants, and that's the first time I've seen that in the last 3 or 4 months since asking the question. So it'd be an interesting one in the next couple of months, just whether it starts to build, that the benefit cap issues just might start to come to fruition a little bit more.
Yeah.
And I think this kind of covers what you said, Dave, just a second ago. 40% of people are just one financial shock away from severe poverty. If someone's on a low income and their fridge freezer breaks down, or their cooker goes, or something goes wrong with the car, people haven't got the money to suddenly find to pay for that kind of stuff. And that means that people then start going into debt. I'm glad that I put that slide in, because that kind of mirrors exactly what you said a couple of minutes ago with your work with TSP. Okay, in terms of the agenda for the next half an hour or so, we're going to go through how the first 12 weeks of someone's new tenancy is critical. I'm really passionate about getting it right for new tenants. It can drive long-term tenant satisfaction. The sector goes heavy on how important it is to deliver strong levels of customer service, and the regulator is continuously looking at organisations in terms of how they deliver services to tenants. But for many organisations, how they can drive that long-term tenant satisfaction is at the sign up, and I'll go through that in a little bit more detail in a minute. Feel free to use the chat for discussion and debate, by the way. I know many people have started to do that. What we'll look through in the next half an hour is how the first 6 months of someone's tenancy defines the tenant journey. We'll look at how that can impact tenant satisfaction. We'll look at the importance of personalising the service as well. It's not a one-size-fits-all approach anymore. And I think, Dave, I put in the chats just a second ago that housing officers and income officers aren't just housing officers and income officers anymore. They're like mental health advocates, counsellors, welfare benefit experts, support workers, marriage counsellors, all wrapped into one. They've got to wear probably 9 or 10 very, very different hats, and personalising the services probably the new norm. And we'll also look at getting behind the front door. Not just looking at probably the basics, but looking at things in a little bit more detail so that new tenants get off to the best possible start. Okay, so we're going to launch into some polls, aren't we, Dave? You're going to bring up some questions, and if people can answer these questions, we'll be able to share what people are thinking. So the first question is, how would you rate your organization's approach to sign up for new tenants? Is it brilliant? Is it great? Is it good? Is it just about okay? Is it fine? Or is it not so good? Or is it pretty terrible? So one question that I always ask a lot of Mobysoft customers is if you had to rate your new tenancy process between 1 to 10, what would you score it? And Dave, what would you say is the average when I ask that question?
So we've got 44 responses so far. 5% are great, 55% are good, 32% are just okay, 7% not so good, and 2% not great at all.
Okay, all right, fair enough. Um, you're right to move on to the next question. Okay, question number 2 is a free text answer. What are the key challenges and barriers to getting your tenants off to a brilliant start when they sign a new tenancy?
And this will form a little word cloud for us to look at as well, which hopefully will look nice once everyone responds.
How many answers have come in so far, Dave? So I'm not able to see it.
We've got 24 coming in. Sort of the main things that seems to be a common thread is engagement seems to be a really, really key one. Benefit applications you see, payment and benefits, costs, additional costs, carpets. So yeah, kind of focus on costs. I guess it's focused on income, costs, and engagement as a sort of key ones. We've got about 44 responses now, 47 responses. Got affordability is coming up.
Yep. Yep. Okay. All right. Good stuff. Should we move on to the next one?
Move on to the next one. Let me launch that one.
Okay. And question number 3 is, how do you get tenants off to an amazing start? What are the key must-do things?
Okay, the responses are coming in so far. So we've got things like engagement, trust, benefit checks, affordability checks, contact from day one, build trust, info about their services, communication from the outset, communication building, relationship from the start, rent in advance, communication intensive support, income maximization. Yeah,
Okay.
affordability checks, benefit checks, support from the start, contact, engagement. Yeah,
Yeah.
all
All right.
focused on that sort of support. We've got about 50
Yeah.
responses now.
Okay. All right. Good stuff. And what we can do, we can collate all those answers, can't we, and include them within the slides that we send out or the recording in the webinar.
Yeah, absolutely. Cool.
Okay. So I'm going to go through some slides in terms of some things that I've picked up across the sector over the last 3 or 4 years of doing this job. Look, there's nothing magical in here. I'm never going to teach people to suck eggs on how they do things. But there might be 2 or 3 things that you scribble down over the next half an hour that you think, oh, I quite like that. And then you can start to embed that within your own organization. It's your best chance to set that strong payment culture when you're trying to get a new tenant off to the best possible start. And I always think the first 12 weeks are absolutely key, but the first 4 weeks are actually critical. It'd be interesting to hear from anyone within the webinar today as to whether there's any poor handover between different teams, because sometimes that can be a bit of a pain point for many. So sometimes you might have, I don't know, a housing team doing the sign up, but then you've got a separate income team that don't always get involved within the sign up. And sometimes there's that silo mentality where teams don't necessarily work together for the good of the tenant. So it'd be interesting to see whether there's any silo working at the moment. In respect of that, would always advocate focus on what you can control. So if you're an income officer and you don't always get the information from your fellow housing teams as to what that new tenant feels like and looks like. Focus on what you can control, and what you can control is just simply picking up the phone and speaking to that new tenant. I said it a minute ago, the process drives long-term and short-term tenant satisfaction. So for example, Dave, you might be, I don't know, a housing officer for an organization, and you might sign up a new tenant today. And the service that you provide, Dave, to that new tenant is absolutely exemplary. It's brilliant. And I'm sure it would be, wouldn't it, if you were a housing officer?
Of course.
Of course. But if you were perfect, if you were brilliant, that tenant has gone away thinking, blimey, Dave at such and such housing has been absolutely brilliant with me today. I've just got my keys, but Dave's gone through everything and he's been really brilliant with me. That drives that short-term and long-term tenant satisfaction that organizations are craving for at the moment. There's also the flip side of that, is if the service was a bit mediocre and a bit average and the sign up was done in like a dark kitchen in a void property and it was all a bit rubbish, that tenant is thinking, well, I've just signed up for a new property, but no one at my social housing providers really bothered to take care of me, and that can start drive that negative tenant satisfaction that is hard to then suddenly turn around. And as we know, if you can get it right at the sign up, it protects not just debt in the long term, but also future workloads as well. Be interesting to hear from everyone today as to whether anyone gets rented in advance consistently every time. I think when I asked this question, it's a bit mixed. Some organizations don't get any rent in advance at all. Some organizations definitely get 2 weeks in advance, which sounds absolutely brilliant. But it'd be interesting to hear from others whether people get rent in advance up front, or whether there's this a stipulation that anyone that signs up for a property has to bring that week's rent or 2 weeks rent to the sign up. Really important to establish the ongoing payment amount and also the frequency of how someone is going to be paying. How often do people here today have to tell people the difference between paying for weekly and monthly? Sometimes you have to be crystal clear about what tenants actually need to do. We'll come on to the art of direct debits a bit later on, actually, by the way. And I'm a big believer in sending follow-up text messages or follow-up emails that confirms what the tenant has agreed to pay moving forward. So, for example, Dave, you might sign up a new tenant today and you've agreed exactly what they're going to be paying in terms of their rent, frequency, the method. But did you know you're 80% more likely to see that payment plan succeed in the future if you send a follow-up message, text message or email to confirm what's been agreed? Some organizations that I work with will send that text message whilst they're on the phone to the tenant or whilst they're with the tenant, because psychologically, just having that ping in that person's pocket to confirm what's been agreed just suddenly starts to professionalize everything. Always good to establish the support that the tenant is going to be receiving in terms of benefits. And it'd be interesting to hear from people today whether you get good information at sign up around next of kin and any support worker information, particularly where there's struggles with contacting new tenants in those first 4 weeks. Sometimes if you've got authority to speak to a next of kin, sometimes it's a good strategy to use. And I think someone has mentioned on the comments already this morning that there should be more emphasis on outlining the implications for failing to pay, or outlining the implications of not getting benefits paid in time as well. Next slide, please, Dave. I quite like this question. So if all of your accounts were audited tomorrow, so if you had an auditor come in and they audited all of your new tenancies, would all of your new tenancies, in terms of the accounts on your HMS, would it contain clear notes on all of the below? What benefits the tenant is receiving, so what's being claimed in the expected amount, that the officer has talked through any shortfalls in what the tenant has to pay, when the rent is due, the date that they've agreed to pay, and also the frequency of their payments, confirmation that officers have sent those follow-up text messages that I've just alluded to, and also making sure that there's a clear outline on the implications of what would happen if there's a failure to make payments, and also that there's good next of kin or support worker information. Next slide, please, Dave. Just a couple of things from here. Actually, I'll pick out the two at the bottom. Once the tenant signs up and they've moved in, I think it's important to do those follow-up visits in the first 4 to 6 weeks. And I think plenty of organizations do follow-up visits just to make sure that people have moved in safely. However, if that tenant is not engaging, it usually sets some alarm bells. I always think it's good to check historic accounts as well, because the tenant that you've just signed up might have been an historic tenant in the past. Sometimes there might be a little bit of credit on someone's account that you could potentially move over to that new account. And that could act as a bit of a buffer for that tenant in terms of if anything goes wrong for them in the future. Next slide, please. So we've spoken about rent in advance. We've spoken about how and when and where to claim certain benefits. I think I'm right, Dave, in saying that is there something like £24 billion that goes unclaimed in benefits every single year?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that is just benefits, but there are a whole heap of other support that always goes unclaimed as well, whether that's from charities to energy companies to advice services.
Yeah, 24 billion pound goes unclaimed in benefits every single year. I think it's something like 7 million households in the UK are not maximising the income that they're entitled to. So anything that you can do to maximise people's income is surely going to be a good thing. Be interesting to hear from anyone this morning as to whether anyone diarises for that very first rent payment to land, and do you check in with the tenant 24 hours before to double check that that tenant understands clearly that they need to make that very, very first rent payment. You could also use things like text messages as well to act as reminders. So things like, don't forget to pay by 10 a.m. on Friday, the 10th of July, as agreed.
Mark, out of interest, where do you see, like, what does best practice look like for you in terms of those affordability entitlement checks, and where do you see it sometimes not quite working?
Yeah, so three or four organizations have actually just come to mind on the affordability issue. So there's one organization that we work with at the moment that will rag rate new tenants before they sign up for a property. So they'll do a little bit of a risk assessment for each new tenant, and they'll place that new tenant into a high risk, medium risk, or low risk category based on everything they know about the tenant. If someone comes in as high risk, so there's potential there with regards to affordability issues, or there's potential there for vulnerabilities, that tenant will get that intensive support moving forward. That ensures that there's no generalization of tenants, but actually for some tenants that fit into that low risk category, there's probably a lighter touch or a different type of service that's provided to that particular tenant. Does that make sense? I think the better organizations that I've seen have used that smart rag rating to risk assess new tenants to determine which tenants need those complex hand holding.
Yeah, and I mean I kind of speaks to some of that research earlier about just being more proactive by sort of trying to catch people earlier upstream and using data to do that.
Yeah. There's been a couple of councils that I've been working with recently, actually, that have started to look at those tenants as to whether they're tenancy ready. So these are tenants that are perhaps under 25 years of age. They've never held a tenancy before. They've never lived somewhere before. They've always lived perhaps with mum or dad. And more councils are seeing whether someone is tenancy ready. I know me personally, when I moved into my first ever rented home, I didn't know what I was doing in terms of setting up the bills, working out where to put things, plugging in the fridge, all that kind of stuff. So more and more councils are checking to see whether tenants are tenancy ready. And then within that, looking to see whether the tenant has any vulnerabilities, and then looking to tailor the service based on those vulnerabilities that the tenant has got. I think 97% of social housing tenants have got a smartphone, something I read recently. So more and more organisations are asking tenants to add payment reminders into their own phone. So that acts like a little alarm or a little reminder. And I'm a big advocate of diarising to check in with a tenant after perhaps week 2, just to check that they're all right. It's a big thing for some tenants moving in. So check in with someone just to make sure that they're fine and everything that's expected of them has been done. Be really interesting to hear from everyone today on a couple of things. Firstly, do you always obtain good contact details? So do you get good phone numbers, email addresses, next of kin information? And also, it would be interesting to hear from people as to whether you've got a good tenant portal, because a great way to free up your own capacity is to get more and more new tenants to self-serve for themselves. It's a bit of a myth that people in social housing can't go online to do things, because most people have to access things like benefits online these days. There's going to be a small element of people that are going to be digitally incapable of going online. I completely get that. But a great way to free up your own capacity is to get more and more tenants to self-serve for themselves. So things like look at your rent statement online or report a repair online too. And I've been working with a couple of organisations at the moment that have been asking that question, that statement in red, asking someone how someone is going to furnish their home. Because if someone moves into a property and they've literally got nothing, no furniture, no carpets, that's quite a grim existence. That's quite a sad thing to hear and see. So more and more organisations are asking someone how are they going to be furnishing their home. That only works really if you've got options up your sleeve to help that person. But again, it would be interesting to hear from people whether they've got things like furniture projects, or they use, I don't know, low cost websites to help people furnish their home. Is that something you sometimes see, Dave, in terms of the organisations that you work with in terms of grants or
Yeah, I think it's really
funds?
interesting. Kind of two things you mentioned. So one about that sort of like self-serve thing as well. We've worked with a lot of housing providers specifically, and that sometimes there's a new tool, new way of working, and that kind of like, will my tenants actually do this? And it springs to mind. We did a pension credit campaign using Lightning Reach to over 60-year-olds with one housing provider. It was just one text sent to about 1,000 people, and overnight we had about 100 people log on to Lightning Reach and actually get matched to support. So 100 people just from one text doing it themselves over 60. So I think, yeah, you're right. People can actually do a lot of this themselves if given the right tools.
Yeah.
And yeah, some of the biggest support that we see people actually getting online and reach as well can be those basics that actually make an incredibly huge impact to people. And like you say, whether that's like a white good, a fridge freezer, or sort of other sort of equipment and appliances, before people are getting into debt, because then they don't need to get into debt to then buy those things as well. So yeah, we see that as a really big and quite a small measure really, but a huge impact on someone's well-being.
So before I moved over to working for Mobysoft about 4 years ago, I used to be like a head of service for a couple of large housing associations, and a couple of things that we did do in terms of blending the human touch, but blending good tech with some of these things. So massive focus on making sure there was that human approach. So providing good levels of customer service, but mixing it with good levels of automation. And these were just some of the things that we embedded at my last organization. So we used to send 3 supportive text messages in the first 6 weeks of someone's new tenancy, just reminding them to do certain things, but also checking in with them as well. I think organizations still do things like introductory tenancies now. So back then we used to do automated messaging at month 3, month 6, and month 9 to double check that people had a clear rent account. And the system that we were using at the time as well was clever enough to send a tenant an instant text message if their new direct debit had failed. And if we visited a new tenant in the first couple of weeks of their new tenancy and they were not there, the system was clever enough to read that we'd actually visited the property, would put a card through the property. In turn, that tenant would then receive a text message, and then invariably we would speak to the tenant through that tenant ringing in. We were also always pushing tenants to online platforms, so any of these messages were always trying to direct people to self-serve for themselves. I think interdepartmental working is absolutely critical at the moment. Sometimes when I'm working with some organizations, sometimes there's a little bit of silo working, and that's them telling me that rather than me seeing it. So something that I've personally done in the past is made sure that there's been good strategic and operational work streams to ensure that tenants get off to the best possible start. So little things that like making sure that there are weekly void meetings with your lettings team or your neighbourhoods team, but also making sure that there's monthly catch-ups between perhaps those teams that play a part in signing new tenants up, so your housing teams, lettings teams, income teams, so that the service can continuously be improved. I also think it's good to attend non-income team meetings as well, because anyone within the organisation plays a part sometimes when they are potentially speaking to a new tenant, particularly contact centres. So little bite-sized training to teams like contact centres, contact centre staff can always be key because they're often people that are going to be speaking to new tenants as much as those frontline teams like housing teams and income teams. Just some further considerations, and I think I put it in a chat earlier around the increases in vulnerabilities and the increases in um, complex tendencies, particularly mental health as well. And it'd be interesting to hear from everyone this morning as to whether you're seeing a big increase in people with mental health and complex needs. One thing that I'm hearing a lot of at the moment is more and more adults being diagnosed with things like ADHD and autism and having to adapt the service and perhaps be flexible on the service that you're providing based on what's in front of you. So I heard a really good story a couple of months ago where the housing officer was signing up a new tenant and the income officer was with them as well. And the tenant had quite severe ADHD, and both the housing officer and the income officer could see that the tenant was probably finding it quite difficult to concentrate on 1,001 things that they were going through. There was also a light flickering in the room, and the tenant was just kind of focused on this light as well. So the sign up wasn't going very well at all. So both the housing officer and the income officer decided that look, this wasn't really working out. They read the situation. What they did do, they segmented the information about the sign up into smaller chunks so that tenant could understand things in a different way. And they also moved the sign up to a different room where there wasn't a flickering light. So just doing two or three very, very quick things, reading the situation, being flexible in the situation, just meant that that tenant got off to the best possible start rather than just rushing through things. I definitely think there's probably a correlation between money and mental health. Dave, do you think that?
Yeah, absolutely. And there's the money and mental health charity as well. That's done a lot of really interesting work on that.
Yeah. There's loads of really good information on the Royal College of Psychiatrists website. Loads of good leaflets and guides, by the way. But it's definitely a link between money and mental health. I think at the moment, the strain of being in debt, what that can have on someone's mental health is probably quite stark. A couple of things that I've picked up recently. I quite like this. So some organisations are starting to adapt the service, um, making those reasonable adjustments to support tenants better. So when a tenant signs up for a property, one or two organisations that I've seen in the last couple of weeks have started to ask two two key questions. Are there any adjustments I need to make our service to you better? And what's making it hard to keep up with your rent payments? So two quite open questions that just allows the organisation to adjust their service just to ensure that that tenant is getting the best possible service that they deserve. But also there's that professional curiosity. I quite like those two questions. They're quite easy questions to ask, and it just makes sure that the service is being elevated as well. And I think linked in with that, it's about what's going on behind the front door. And I would always take it back to how would you want a close relative to be supported if they were struggling financially or mentally? So if it was your mum, if it was your dad, if it was your sister, if it was your nan, how would you want that close relatives to be supported if they were a new tenant moving into one of your new homes? And it'd be interesting to hear from everyone today as to whether sign-ups are done at the office, are they done at the local neighbourhoods, or are they done at the property? And always play back to yourself. Was it a good experience for the tenant? I always remember I used to be a housing officer a long, long time ago, and sometimes I completed sign-ups in the winter in a property that was dark, it was a bit gloomy, it was cold, it was freezing. I was probably shivering just writing things down. And actually looking back on it, it probably was a terrible experience for that new tenant moving into that new property. So I think if I could go back and redo those things, I would probably think about it. Was it a good spirit experience for the tenant? Could I have done things a little bit differently? I'm just conscious of time, Dave. How many slides have we got and how long have we got left?
I think we've got around about 15 more slides and
Okay.
probably between 5 and 10 minutes. Want to make sure we've left some time for questions and
Yeah,
answers.
yeah. Okay, I'll skip through these. So these are just that one back, actually, Dave. Just go back one. Um, I don't know if any of you are revamping your communications at the moment, but I picked this up from an organization called Shepherd's Bush Housing Association a couple of years ago. They've revamped their arrears letters. So on the left is their old rent arrears letter, and on the right is their brand new rent arrears letter. The one on the right makes good use of things like QR codes. It also makes good use of color and bullet points. It gets people to self-serve more. All right, it's not perfect, but I do think it's probably better than the one on the left-hand side. The left-hand side of the one is a bit clunky. It races towards what will happen if someone misses a payment. It's a bit old-fashioned, but we'll share these. We'll probably share these as part of the slide. So always up for helping people if they're looking to revamp their rent arrears letters too. Always place yourself in the customer's shoes. If this process or the system isn't working, maybe you need to process map the entire customer journey. How does it feel to be a tenant? Can you make the experience better, resulting in better tenancies? If it's not working, revisit the process. I always think it's important to understand the customer demographic. I think the days of just giving someone a handbook when they move into a property is probably long gone. So more and more organizations are using things like YouTube style videos or QR codes or little 2 minute style videos that tell people exactly what they need to do when they move into a new property or to be a new tenant. There's a council that I'm working with at the moment that have put together about 5 or 6 little 2 minute little YouTube style videos on what it means to be a new tenant, what it means to have a clear rent account, and what it means to get your universal credit process up and running. I thought they're quite good. And as we've said before, blending the human touch with things like automation, so use of text messages to drip feed the support. Just a couple of things on universal credit. I thought I'd put this in because invariably when you're speaking to a new tenant, you're probably going to be going through universal credit. 8.3 million people in the UK now claim UC. Nearly half of households on UC have got children. 47% of all households have one or more third-party deduction being taken from their UC entitlement. So less money to play with when they're looking to sustain their tenancy. And 50% of everyone on universal credit now is in the no work requirement conditionality group. An extra 830,000 have actually transitioned onto universal credit between Feb 25 and Feb 26. There's some mad numbers there. I think in terms of UC, I'll go through just some things that I picked up recently. I think it's always good to establish the reason for someone making a claim for universal credit. Are they new to it? Really important to establish the income and household composition. One thing I'm hearing a lot of at the moment, non-dependents not contributing towards the rent. So you've got mum or dad struggling to pay, and then you've got adult children in the house that perhaps are working, but the mum or dad are too afraid to ask their son or daughter to contribute towards the rent. And again, it'd be interesting to hear from everyone this morning as to whether you're seeing a bit of an impact of non-dependents not contributing towards the rent account. Actually worked with an organisation a few weeks back that have started to put together some bespoke letters just for non-dependents. And if I can dig them out, I'll share them with everyone. Next slide, please. All right, for moving on, Dave. Oh, I see. Sorry. Always good to explain the process for UC because the DWP probably won't go through any deductions the tenant might have. We've spoken about non-dependents as well. And if you move on to the next slide, please, Dave. I think use of reminders, use of budgeting tools. Never wait for serious arrears to accumulate. Once someone's got their UC payment in place, it's about that early contact, that early intervention. Treating each customer on its own merits is massively important. We spoke about £24 billion that goes unclaimed in benefits every single year. A third of that is unclaimed UC. £8.3 billion of UC goes unclaimed every year. That's invariably because people think the process is too complex, so they don't bother making a claim, or they feel they're not going to be entitled to anything because they feel that they're probably going to be earning too much to claim anything. So use of things like Lightning Reach is going to be a massive help to them. Next slide, please, Dave. I'll wrap this up in the next couple of minutes. I really like this slide. So this is a slide that very, very quickly tells you how to calculate someone's first universal credit payment if they're a new tenant. So for example, if someone makes a claim for UC on the 1st of April, their assessment period is deemed as being the 1st of April to the 30th of April, and they would receive their first payment 7 days after the end of the assessment period. Second example, if someone makes a claim on the 11th of April, their assessment period is 11th of April, 10th of May, 30 days. They would receive their first UC payment 7 days after the end of the assessment period. So a very, very quick snapshot that shows you how to calculate and work out someone's first UC payment. Next slide, please, Dave. So you've done the sign up, but what's next? Next slide, please. What does your post-tenancy process look like? What does the next 4 to 12 weeks look like for the tenant? Is there an account plan for vulnerable tenants? I'm working with a couple of councils at the moment that have started to put together mini account plans that are put together by the income team and the housing teams focused on vulnerable tenants. There's like a list of bullet points that both teams will commit to make sure that tenant doesn't fall between the gaps. And some organisations are going the extra mile, actually giving more information to tenants on local surroundings. So where are the local schools? Where are the local shops? Where's the local GP services? Next slide, please. I'm quite lucky at Mobysoft. I've got access to loads of really good data. So with every customer that we work with, or certainly every customer that I work with, I'll always play back to a customer their new tenant performance, so we can track how organizations are doing on successfully supporting new tenants. So this one here just gives you a very, very quick snapshot of an organization that has seen a 20% improvement in the average household debt for new tenants based on last year's sign-ups compared to the one before, and nearly a third of their new tenants sign up in the last 12 months have got a credit or zero balance. And I think the next slide showcases another customer. Yeah, so this is actually Guildford Council. They do some incredible work on supporting new tenants. Three quarters of their new tenants have got a credit or zero balance, which is pretty incredible. And tenancies that are signed up between April 24 and April 25, 83% of those tenants signed up have got a credit or zero balance, which is a testament to all the hard work of everyone at Guildford. So in terms of a summary of today, hopefully you've scribbled down 2 or 3 things that perhaps you could go away and start to utilize at your own organizations. Understanding what's going on behind the front door. It's not just the rent account. Nudging people into paying, that financial re-education that I think Dave spoke about right at the start, making sure that every customer journey is positive and adapting to those complexities, adapting to those vulnerabilities. The role of an officer is probably changing. People have got to wear lots of different hats. So being adaptable to the service and what's out there is really, really important. And I think that's pretty much it.
That is it. So Mark, thank you so much. I think that was just very, very practical, and it's been so good to see all of the insights and chat on and how engaged people have been in the comments. So I will give people a minute or so to drop in any questions you might have for me or for Mark, and particularly Mark as well. I'd be really interested to hear what you've got to say. There was one I picked up on from Lucy, I think it was, in terms of what does everyone use for budgeting tools, what's the friendliest and easiest to use. I'm going to do a shameless plug. We've just launched our own budget checker tool at Lightning Reach about a month ago, where we are enabling people to do really easy affordability assessments based on their own income and expenditure. We have open banking, pre-populating all of that data. We make it really easy for tenants to be able to do that. And at the end, they're also able to identify the financial support on offer. So if you are interested in that, feel free to reach out to partnerships@lightningreach.org to help you there. Do we have any questions for Mark coming through?
I think people have put loads of chat in the chat there, which is great to see. One thing that has just stood out whilst I've been just going through it is the non-dependence issue. And it's something that everywhere I go at the moment, there seems to be a bit of an issue with non-dependents not contributing towards the rent. That it could be a subject matter that we talk about on a separate webinar, that Dave, maybe in the future, because there's definitely some things that we could talk about, and also Lightning Reach could talk about, but also customers could talk about too.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've had quite a few questions come in about sharing the slides. Yes, what we'll do is we'll share the slides. We'll also share a recording of this. We'll probably put it on a YouTube or something like that, just to make sure that if you want to share it to any colleagues, you can do as well. Mark, I don't know if you want to drop your email in the chat as well, in case people are interested in reaching out to you, but I'll also do that in the follow-ups to people afterwards. But if anyone doesn't have anything else they would like to ask, then I think we can maybe draw that to a close. Thank you so much, everyone. It's been some really, really good engagement. Really appreciate your time, and I hope you survive in today's heat. So thanks again for joining us, and speak to you all again soon.